Yeah, there's been a huge influx of metal moving from London to COMEX. You can look at the amount of contracts standing for delivery for February for gold. Those are definitely outsized. Even January was outsized. January was if you want to call it a non-delivery month, it was not one of the major months, yet there was a huge amount of gold. I think it was close to 3 million ounces, 2.9 million ounces in January. So one school of thought is this gold is moving from London to New York to meet anticipated deliveries. Same thing with silver. Silver's the following month out. It's March. So if we get through January, then if we get through February, then we've got March for silver. So in the next 45 to 60 days are going to be nail biters for the shorts, just simply because if they don't have enough metal, then you get a failure to deliver, and a failure to deliver, it really blows the exchange up. Because in the words of my late partner, Jim Sinclair, what's the value of a contract they cannot perform? If they can't deliver, then what's it worth? It's worth zero. That's one school of thought on the metal moving from London to COMEX. Another school of thought, if you look all over the world, nations have been repatriating their gold over the last over the last 2 years. Nations have repatriated their gold out of New York, out of London, and brought that gold home to their own territory. And I think that is a function of what was done to Russia back in October, November of 2023, when the 300 billion of treasury reserves were basically absconded with. Nation after nation is looking at that, and they're saying, well, if they can do it to Russia, then they could do it to anyone. And I think that's a function of nations not wanting to be, if you want to call it, canceled. That they want to make sure that their monetary reserves don't get canceled. And, gold is the obvious choice, because if you hold it in your possession, it can't be canceled, it cannot bankrupt, it can never become a black hole on a central bank's balance sheet. It's always going to have value, and we can get into this later in the discussion, but what you're viewing here, in my opinion, this is the Great Reset. Now, you call it monetary reset. I'm going to call it the everything reset, and we can talk about that. If you view this entire thing, first off, going back to Germany was the first one really to repatriate anything of size. They asked for 300 tons of gold. They were told, it's going to take at least 2 to 3 years to do because of the logistics, blah, blah, blah. It was all bullshit. If they could not do 300 tons in 2 or 3 years, then how can they do 400 tons now in 10 days, 2 weeks time? So that clearly shows that they were lying back then. It's my guess that certainly there's some credence to these COMEX contracts have to be delivered, because if they're not delivered on, then they go to zero and the confidence in futures will collapse. Looking at it from the standpoint of a global reset, this could just be onshoring gold to the United States, because the United States understands there's a reset. And the old saying, he who has the gold makes the rules, you want as much gold on hand as you possibly can. Now, this 400 plus tons is chump change compared to what has been accumulated by central banks over the last 3 to 5 years, and really chump change if you compare it to what China has sourced over the last 10 to 15 years. It was really back in, I think it was 2011 or 12, when China began leaking some of their treasuries and unloading gold. I mean, if I remember 6-7 years ago saying, and I mean, it was easily done, on the back of a napkin, I could show you by 2017-18 that China already had 25,000 metric tons. So that number, in my estimation, is probably 35,000 metric tons compared to the supposed 8,300 tons that the U.S. has, which I don't believe they have. So our gold reserves have been dwarfed by China. Now, getting into the reset aspect of it, I think the last 3 weeks, and 3 weeks ago was the inauguration for Trump, the last 3 weeks, if you cannot see that this is a complete reset upheaval of the status quo, business as usual, then you're not paying attention, because everything is changing. I mean, just look at the executive orders, and I'm not happy with all the executive orders, and we can get into that if you want, or not. But the executive orders are upending the status quo. The way America had been run for the previous 50 years is already changed, and it's going to continue to change. So you've got social issues, you've got financial issues, you have monetary issues. The entire system is in the process of resetting, and I would think that within, 90 to 180 days, you're going to look back to where we were just 3 weeks ago, under the previous administration and the previous, if you want to call it, world order. You're not going to recognize in 3 to 6 months. Well, one obvious thing would be to remonetize the gold that we hold. It's on the books at $42 an ounce. So if they were to remonetize that, or revalue that to the current price of $2,900 plus per ounce, you're looking at, I think the number somewhere in the neighborhood of 900 billion, close to $1 trillion. So the gold that we hold actually has value of, use the figure of $1 trillion versus, a paltry figure well under $100 billion on the balance sheet. So that would free up, if you wanted to call it collateral, that would free up collateral that they could either borrow against or spend. And that's assuming that they use the current number of $2,900 an ounce. Now, I had done the math, 4 or 5 years ago, that in order to cover the debt, gold would have to be $125,000 an ounce, and it's obviously more than that now. But what that, if we had a reset and you got to, really high numbers like $125,000, $150,000, that would allow the Treasury to basically cover the debt with gold holdings. And that I don't think would be frowned upon by foreign nations, because they've been picking up gold left and right for the last few years, and they have gold on their balance sheets, so it would reliquefy central bank balance sheets across the world. So it's that's the obvious aspect of it. Revaluing assets. What about BLM land? Other assets that the U.S. holds. Could they sell those off? I'm not privy to everything that they're considering monetizing, but you're talking about national assets now that they could be monetized. I lean toward it's a gold solution. It's not necessarily a land solution, and I say this because Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, one of his biggest holdings is physical gold. And you have to look back, Trump's family was a gold family. His grandfather or great-grandfather was actually invested in mines. So that family understands gold. and I think they would understand what remonetizing gold would mean. And I think Trump also does understand that the Federal Reserve is, it's neither federal, they don't have a reserve, and the way it was done originally and the way it still is now, basically it's an illegal operation. It's private bankers. So it wouldn't surprise me to see, when all is said and done, where the central banking system itself collapses and you start seeing nations issuing non-interest bearing currency. That's like an all-encompassing question. I think if you look at trade is it's a very finely tuned machine, if you will. You get any type of shocks or big changes to trade, and what it does, it'll slow trade down. And I expect to see big disruptions in trade. You've got the tariff issues, and you've got the issue of how is the world gonna settle trade? I mean, when this reset goes through, how is the trade going to be settled? Is it going to be settled in dollars? Is it going to be settled in gold equivalent fiat currencies? And then you've got, the pie gets sliced in half. You've got the BRICS currencies and you've got the Western world. So, are the BRICS going to be willing to accept Western fiat for trade? I mean, I don't know the answer to this. I do know that the BRICS will trade amongst themselves, and trade will be pretty smooth because they're all joining a new common currency. I guess the best thing to say at this point is there's nothing in concrete at this point, but we see a lot of signs that the world that you knew is not the world that you're going to know.